Imagine being called Gimpy every morning, humiliated for a limp you earned saving lives on a battlefield. What if, one day, someone stepped up and revealed the truth? This is the story of Jane Parker, and the day a truck stop learned who she really was. The first hints of dawn spread across the Oklahoma plains as trucks rolled off I-40, their headlights cutting through lingering mist. Big Joe's truck stop came alive in the gray light, a simple but tidy diner with large windows, sturdy wooden tables, and a soft hum of conversations. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon drifted through the air as Jane Parker, 38, moved between tables, her right leg dragging slightly with each careful step. The morning crowd trickled in, a pair of produced drivers swapping weather reports, a young reefer hauler FaceTiming his daughter before hitting the road, an older couple in matching denim jackets who always ordered the same 2 black coffees. Jane knew most of them by name, kept track of their regular orders, and offered a tired but sincere smile to every new guest. She liked the quiet routine, the way the sun slowly filled the diner, the soft clatter of plates, the gentle laughter from drivers joking about way stations and fuel prices. But every morning, around 7 a.m., that fragile calm broke. The contractors arrived with the precision of a bad omen, 3 broad-shouldered men in company logo jackets, stomping mud off their boots like they owned the place. They spread out across a corner booth, voices loud enough to make everyone look up. Each word was a test of dominance, bragging about rigged deals, cursing dispatchers, making crass jokes. But what set Jane's pulse hammering were the moments when their eyes locked on her limp. "Hey, Gimpy!" one called out the moment she approached with a fresh pot of coffee. His voice dripped with amusement, as though the word itself was a punchline. "Legs still not working right, huh? You sure you can carry that pot without falling?" She forced her smile to stay in place, refusing to look them in the eye. "Would you like a refill?" she asked, her voice steady but soft. Another contractor laughed, leaning back with his boots on the seat. "We were just saying you ought to get one of those motorized scooters. You'd zip around here a lot faster. And hey, maybe not spill on anyone." A couple at the next table shifted uncomfortably. The man cleared his throat as if he might speak up, but his wife placed a hand on his arm, shaking her head almost imperceptibly. Around the room, eyes returned to coffee cups, hands fidgeted, and the dull roar of the contractors' laughter rolled over the silence. Jane's mind flashed back, unbidden, to the smell of burnt sand and diesel, the metallic tang of blood in the desert air. She remembered the chaos of Ramadi, the crack of gunfire, the acrid smoke of an IED, the screaming of a young soldier clutching his shredded thigh. She remembered kneeling in the dirt, adrenaline surging as she worked a tourniquet with trembling hands, calling for medevac over radio static. She remembered the wave of heat that slammed into her as another explosion sent her sprawling, the searing pain in her leg, and the darkness that came in violent, suffocating waves. She shook herself back to the present, blinking rapidly as she topped off their coffees. The contractors barely noticed her expression, continuing to talk over her as if she were invisible. Behind the counter, Big Joe wiped down glasses with a rag he'd replaced 3 times already this morning. He watched Jane, his eyes shadowed with worry. Jane had been working for him for 6 years, ever since she showed up on a rainy afternoon asking for a chance. He'd never asked about her past, but he'd seen the scars on her leg when she slipped once and her pant leg rode up. He'd also seen how the rowdy contractors treated her, but every time he thought about throwing them out, he hesitated. The truck stop's margins were thin, and the contractor's company bought fuel, meals, and supplies every week. He looked at Jane's back as she stepped into the kitchen, shoulders tense, and hated himself a little more each morning. In the kitchen, Jane leaned against the stainless steel counter, breath ragged. She could hear the laughter through the swinging door. Giselle, the line cook, peeked out from the grill, eyes sympathetic but weary. "You want me to handle them?" she asked quietly. Jane shook her head. "They're not worth it," she whispered. She smoothed her apron, wincing as a twinge shot up her leg. She refused to let them see her pain. She'd learned long ago that weakness was an invitation to more cruelty. The breakfast rush pressed on. Jane moved from table to table, taking orders, refilling mugs, offering small comforts. She complimented a mother's cute toddler, helped an elderly driver find his reading glasses, and made sure plates were hot when they arrived at tables. But every time she crossed paths with the contractor's table, the mocking eyes and quiet snickers cut deeper than any wound. The regulars noticed. A young flatbed driver who often tipped generously watched, his hands clenched into fists. An old-timer with a Vietnam vet cap avoided eye contact, guilt and fear warring on his weathered face. Some quietly muttered that it wasn't right, but no one spoke up. Outside, the highway rumbled with the passing of trucks, engines roaring like distant thunder. Inside, Big Joe's felt like a bubble of silence punctured by cruel laughter. When the contractors finally paid and left, tossing crumpled bills on the table, the room exhaled. Conversations slowly resumed, the clink of forks and soft laughter returning in cautious waves. Jane gathered the dishes from their booth with practiced efficiency, avoiding the dark coffee ring left behind, as though she could erase the morning's ugliness one swipe at a time. She caught Big Joe's eye through the pass window. He opened his mouth as if to say something but closed it again, turning to ring up another customer instead. Jane sighed, collecting the empty plates and retreating into the kitchen, the echo of the contractor's voices still ringing in her head. Outside, the sun was rising higher, bathing the trucks in pale gold. But inside, Jane felt stuck in the dark, trapped between the woman she used to be and the ghost she'd become. And so the morning at Big Joe's went on like countless mornings before. The hero who saved lives in the past, reduced to whispers, stares, and silent shame, until a stranger walked through the door. The morning lull after the contractor's departure left Big Joe's truck stop oddly quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Jane Parker moved with careful precision, wiping tables and refilling napkin holders. The hush felt heavy. She tried to focus on the tasks that kept her anchored, but her mind drifted back to the memories she tried hardest to bury. A little before 8 a.m., the bell over the door jingled again, pulling every eye in the diner toward the entrance. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped in, his presence unassuming but solid. He wore a faded black Carhartt jacket over a gray thermal shirt, worn jeans, and heavy boots caked in red Oklahoma dust. His short salt and pepper beard framed a lined face, and pale blue eyes scanned the room like they were measuring every shadow. Jeremy Dawson was an independent trucker known to a few as a man who preferred solitude, his radio mostly silent as he crisscrossed the country. He stepped up to the counter, setting his duffel bag down with a soft thud. Jane approached automatically, offering a warm but tired smile. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please, black." His voice was gravelly, like it had been roughened by years of diesel fumes and late-night conversations with lonely highways. As Jane poured, Jeremy's gaze drifted to the small, faded patch sewn near the hem of her work jacket, a blue and white square with 3 vertical stripes, slightly frayed but unmistakable to those who knew. The 3rd Infantry Division. His breath caught. He stared at it, the diner around him fading as memories flooded back. He was 28 again, in the blinding heat of Ramadi. He could almost feel the weight of his body armor, the choking sand filling his mouth. He heard the deafening roar of an IED going off meters from his convoy, saw the chaos that erupted, fire, smoke, and blood. He remembered screaming as shrapnel tore through his shoulder, then a calm, steady voice cutting through the panic. "Stay with me," that voice ordered. He remembered eyes, clear, fierce eyes, and hands working fast, pressing a bandage to his wound, moving with certainty even as gunfire rattled nearby. He remembered feeling safe, for a moment, in the middle of hell. Jeremy blinked hard, focusing again on Jane's face. The eyes were older, tired, but unmistakable. He knew it was her. Before he could speak, the door banged open. The contractors had returned, one slamming his palm against the glass as he stepped inside. They'd left something behind, and now they strutted back with more swagger than before. Seeing Jane by the counter, they couldn't resist. "Hey, Gimpy, miss us already?" one jeered, his voice loud enough to draw glances from every table. His buddies laughed, reclaiming their booth as if the place belonged to them. Jane stiffened. The pot in her hand trembled. Hot coffee sloshed dangerously near her wrist. Jeremy saw it all. The way her knuckles whitened. The silent fury she swallowed down. He stood up slowly, every eye turning to him as his chair scraped the floor. He looked at Jane, his voice low but carrying across the diner. "Sergeant Parker?" he asked, almost gently. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "Sergeant Jane Parker of the 3rd Infantry Division?" The contractors went quiet. Confused whispers rippled among the other patrons. Jane's mouth opened, but no words came. She felt dizzy, as if the world had tilted beneath her feet. She hadn't heard that name, her true name, her rank, spoken aloud in years. Jeremy stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked. "Ramadi, July 2006. The convoy ambush. You threw yourself over me, tied a tourniquet around my arm when I was bleeding out." His voice wavered, eyes shining. "You saved my life." Gasps broke out around the diner. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The old couple who'd always ordered black coffees looked at Jane with fresh eyes. The young reefer driver straightened, his jaw slack. Even Big Joe emerged from the kitchen, towel hanging from one thick hand. One contractor scoffed nervously, trying to recover the moment. "What's he talking about? This is just some waitress." Jeremy cut him off with a glare sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. He turned back to Jane. "I've spent years wondering if I'd ever meet you again. I promised myself I'd thank you if I did." His voice dropped, rich with gratitude and pain. "Thank you, Sergeant Parker." Jane's legs nearly gave way. She clutched the counter to stay upright. Emotions surged. Memories of blood and screams. The terror of that day, and the quiet moments in military hospitals where she doubted she'd ever walk again. The diner fell into a tense, reverent hush. The contractors shifted uncomfortably in their booth, their earlier bravado shriveling like air leaking from a tire. They looked around, realizing the room had turned against them. Big Joe stepped forward, face pale with a mix of shock and something like pride. The silence was thick, heavy with words unspoken. But the truth now hung in the air, undeniable, unignorable. Jane blinked, her voice finally breaking through the fog of memories. "You remember me?" she whispered. Jeremy nodded, eyes locked on hers. "I'll never forget." The silence inside Big Joe's felt like a held breath, as if the walls themselves strained to hear what would happen next. Jane Parker's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if everyone else could hear it. Across from her stood Jeremy Dawson, the man she had once pulled back from the brink of death in a war zone. His eyes glistened with memories that matched her own, memories of sand, blood, and the desperate determination to save a life. The contractors shifted in their table, suddenly exposed. Their laughter had died, replaced by restless glances and forced coughs. One opened his mouth, searching for a smart retort to reclaim control of the room, but Jeremy turned on them with quiet fury. "You think she's some easy target?" His voice was low but carried like thunder. "You think it's funny to mock someone's limp? That limp was earned in a place you'll never understand, doing something you'd never have the courage to do." He stepped closer to their booth, his boots heavy on the tile. "I watched her crawl through gunfire to reach me and my men. I remember her hands tying my tourniquet while bullets hit the sand around us. I remember her voice, steady as stone, telling me I wasn't going to die that day. And you?" His gaze bored into the lead contractor. "You sit here every morning like you own this place, mocking her? You have no idea what real strength looks like." Around them, the diners hung on every word. Conversations had stopped. A father with his teenage son leaned forward, eyes wide. Giselle, the cook, slipped from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face pale but fierce. Even Big Joe stepped out from behind the register, his jaw clenched tight. Jeremy turned to the room, his voice rising with emotion. "This woman is Sergeant Jane Parker of the United States Army, a medic who saved countless lives, a hero who nearly lost her own life to keep others breathing. And you all let them treat her like she's nothing. The words hit like a shockwave. A young driver near the window muttered, "Oh my God," shaking his head. The older veteran in the ball cap crossed the floor, moving with a limp of his own. He stopped in front of Jane, tears rimming his eyes, and raised a trembling hand in salute. "Ma'am," he rasped, voice cracking, "thank you for your service." Jane tried to reply, but her throat closed up, her eyes stinging as tears blurred the faces around her. She'd spent so long blending into the background, hoping no one would see her pain. She'd braced herself every day for fresh humiliation, convinced that the world had moved on without caring about her scars. And yet here was Jeremy, unearthing her story in front of everyone. The contractors shrank back, the weight of the diner's stares pressing them into their booth. The lead man swallowed hard, eyes darting for an escape. But Jeremy wasn't finished. He stepped back to Jane's side, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I've driven coast to coast 100 times since that day," he said softly, voice carrying to every corner of the diner. "Every mile. I thought about what I'd say if I ever found you. You didn't just save me, you saved my daughter's father, you saved every Christmas morning, every bedtime story. I owe you everything." A sob broke loose in Jane's chest, ragged and raw. She covered her mouth, her body shaking. Jeremy kept his hand steady on her shoulder, his eyes never leaving hers. Big Joe stepped forward, face flushed, eyes stormy with a mixture of anger and resolve. "That's enough," he barked at the contractors, his voice echoing across the diner. "You three out. Don't come back until you're ready to treat every soul in here with respect." The contractors stumbled to their feet, their earlier arrogance dissolving as they avoided everyone's eyes. They slinked past tables of drivers who glared or shook their heads, the shame clinging to them heavier than any weight they'd ever hauled. The door closed behind them with a final, resounding click. A ripple of relief moved through the diner. Conversation resumed slowly, hushed but warm. The veteran's wife took Jane's hand, squeezing it with quiet gratitude. "We should have said something sooner," she murmured, voice heavy with regret. Big Joe cleared his throat, eyes shining. "Jane," he said, voice low but firm, "I should have protected you from the start. I'm so sorry. From now on, you will never face that alone in my diner." Jeremy gave Jane's shoulder one last squeeze. "You saved me once," he said, voice thick, "and now it's time you knew how much that mattered." The bell over the door jingled again. A pair of truckers entered, saw the tears, and hesitated. But the old veteran stepped forward, explaining in a voice loud enough for them to hear, "We're standing with a hero today." As word spread inside Big Joe's, a fragile but powerful shift took root, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of the diner. Word of what happened at Big Joe's truck stop spread faster than a prairie wildfire. By the time the night shift rolled in, truckers pulling in for coffee already knew her name and her story. The next morning, the first sign something had changed came as Jane pulled into the diner's parking lot. Instead of the usual 2 or 3 rigs, more than a dozen trucks idled quietly in the early dawn light, lined up like a silent honor guard. Drivers stood outside their cabs, arms crossed or hands shoved into pockets against the Oklahoma chill, waiting. Inside, Big Joe nearly dropped the box of eggs he was hauling to the kitchen when he saw the growing crowd. He pushed the door open for Jane as she approached. "Looks like you've got some folks here to see you," he said, his voice warm but still carrying a hint of awe. Jane hesitated at the threshold, her breath catching. Drivers stepped forward one by one. A woman with dark hair pulled into a braid who pressed a challenge coin into Jane's palm. An older man with faded marine tattoos who simply nodded with tears in his eyes. A burly flatbed hauler who gave her a bear hug that nearly lifted her off her feet. Each offered thanks, small gifts, or stories of their own service, the moments they'd spent feeling invisible, too. Inside the diner, tables filled quickly, the air buzzing with the energy of something important. Conversations swirled about convoys in Afghanistan, lonely midnights on endless highways, and memories of friends who hadn't made it home. A small group of drivers passed around a clipboard, taking donations and pledges. Someone suggested starting a fundraiser for wounded veterans in Jane's name. By mid-morning, The contractors who had mocked her slipped back into the diner, eyes downcast, hats in hand. They shuffled to the counter, where Jane was refilling mugs with practiced grace. The lead contractor cleared his throat, voice rough. "Ms. Parker," he began, the words thick with regret. "We were wrong. We acted like fools. We're sorry." Jane studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice clear but not unkind. "But this isn't just about me. There are so many others who never get thanked." The contractors exchanged looks, then placed a thick envelope on the counter. "For the fundraiser," the leader said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's the least we can do." Big Joe stepped up beside Jane, his broad frame radiating determination. He announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Big Joe's will match every dollar raised today, and every Veterans Day from now on, we'll host an event to honor those who served, starting with Sergeant Jane Parker." A cheer rose from the tables, chairs scraping the floor as drivers stood. Jane flushed, overwhelmed but lifted by a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. A local journalist, tipped off by a driver, arrived just before noon with a camera crew. She interviewed Jane near the counter, the footage streaming to evening news broadcasts across Oklahoma and beyond. In the clip, Jane's voice cracked as she said, "I'm not the only one who came home changed. I just want every veteran to know they're seen. They're not alone." The flood of support continued through the day. Families arrived to shake her hand. Old veterans came with photos of their units, eager to share stories. Truckers called friends to reroute their deliveries through Big Joe's, determined to stop in for a meal, a handshake, and a moment of shared respect. Big Joe's began to change almost overnight. What had once been just another roadside diner transformed into a place of quiet reverence, a haven where veterans and their families felt safe, understood, and valued. Drivers pinned unit patches to a wall Big Joe designated as the Wall of Heroes. By the end of the week, it was covered in colors and emblems from every branch of service, each representing a life and a story. Jane found herself at the center of it all. Each day brought new visitors who sat at the counter and told her about their children, their deployments, or their struggles after coming home. She listened, offered hugs or words of encouragement, and introduced them to others who had been through the same. Jeremy, still parked in the lot days later, spent hours beside her, recounting his story to anyone who asked. His eyes glistened with emotion each time he described how Jane's hands had saved his life, how her courage had kept him breathing long enough to see his daughter grow up. Together, they inspired dozens of other veterans and drivers to speak openly about their own battles with trauma, guilt, and healing. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the endless highway and trucks rolled past in a steady procession, Jane stepped outside. She stood by the flagpole Big Joe had installed beside the lot, a new, crisp American flag snapping in the breeze. She closed her eyes, letting the night air wash over her, the rumble of diesel engines a comforting lullaby. Big Joe joined her, arms crossed over his chest. "You know," he said softly, "you've done more than save lives overseas. You've given a whole lot of people hope right here." Jane looked back at the diner, warm lights spilling from the windows, laughter and conversation carrying into the night. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and nodded. "I think," she said quietly, "I'm finally home." In the weeks that followed, Big Joe's truck stop became more than just a diner. It became a symbol, a place where heroes were honored, kindness was expected, and respect wasn't optional. And at the heart of it all stood Sergeant Jane Parker, no longer hidden in the shadows of her limp or her memories, but standing proud, her scars a testament to her strength and her story. This story reminds us that courage doesn't end when the battle is over. It often goes unnoticed among us every day. How would you react if you learned someone you mocked was a hero? Share your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that honor everyday heroes.